So there's sometimes this idea that people who don't look autistic, people who don't outwardly appear to be struggling to every single person they meet all of the time, those people shouldn't use the label autistic, that they're taking something away from people who are really autistic. But we know that masking exists. Masking or camouflaging being hiding autistic traits to avoid the stigmatization and discrimination you might face if you speak or act differently to societal expectations. I have a video about 4 different types of autistic masking that I posted recently that I'll leave linked here. The DSM-5 diagnostic criteria for autism acknowledges that autistic traits might be masked by learned strategies in later life. And masking has been spoken about since at least the 1990s. In 1999, the book Pretending to be Normal was published. But people will often try and judge how autistic someone is based on what they externalize. And some autistic people who are diagnosed as children are actually told they've outgrown the diagnosis, that they've recovered because their autistic traits are no longer as obvious as they were when they were a child. We can't tell that you're different anymore, and you must be fine. So today I'm going to go through 4 reasons why autistic masking is a big deal actually, why not externalizing your autistic traits doesn't just mean you're fine now, and how it can actually be dangerous for autistic people to mask a lot. Number 1, it's well documented that masking can be pretty damn terrible for autistic people's mental health in a number of ways. Let's talk about a few of them. First of all, anxiety is a big one, and in my video, Not Stimming is More Dangerous Than You Think, I focused on a study that found that autistic children who stim less, so stimming being self-stimulatory behaviors, some of the more stereotypical ones associated with autism are hand flapping and rocking. Children who did less of that as they got older, the study followed them as they grew up, they were more anxious than the children who did the same amount of rocking and flapping, or the children who increased. The researchers didn't expect that result. They kind of thought, well, the less autistic symptoms somebody has, the less obviously autistic a person seems, the happier they'll be. That wasn't how it worked out. If you're autistic, you probably agree that stimming can be super relaxing. It can help you to process your sensory environment. It can even bring you pure joy and euphoria. I don't personally suppress stimming because there's anything wrong with the act of stimming. I suppress stimming because I don't want other people to think I'm weird, and I don't want other people to comment on what I'm doing. Who knows how I'd move my body in a completely accepting world? I was thinking about that the other day. What would I be doing with myself? I don't know about you, but it makes sense to me that masking would be kind of anxiety inducing. Social situations to me feel kind of fragmented, scrambled, chaotic are the kind of words I'd probably use to describe it. There's so much to kind of monitor and overthink, and there's an onslaught of information coming at you. One theme that came up in this 2019 study in which autistic people spoke about their experiences with masking was that it's cognitively taxing. And yeah, when you're interacting with somebody, if they're talking to you, you're thinking about what they're saying, but you're also kind of thinking about what you're going to say next. And then you're also thinking about when to speak, when to interject. You don't want an awkward silence, but you also don't want to talk over them because that's rude. You're thinking about your body language, facial expression, eye contact. You're thinking about their body language, their facial expression, their eye contact. And then you've got the whole sensory world churning around you, you know, which might be distracting. And tone as well. You got to think about your tone, their tone, everybody's tone. One man described masking as like a foreign language. Even though one might have adopted it to a good extent, it is never native, he said. And I think that's such a good description because, yeah, while you can get better at masking over time, I've definitely improved my masking skills as I've got older, it still doesn't flow. And there are times that are better than others, but it's not easy. And it doesn't always stop when you go home. After a period of socializing, I tend to just go over it again and again. I replay moments from it, I cringe, and I make audible noises Ooh. I think about how I could have done things better. Sometimes I even write down notes for improvement. It doesn't go out of my head, and it often, when I'm weighing up whether to go out and do a social thing, I have to think, do I have the energy to do the actual thing? And then also kind of deal with the aftermath. This is a thing that non-autistic people can do as well. I think it's a social anxiety thing. But yeah, masking can increase social anxiety for autistic people for sure. Masking the fact that you're autistic can lead to depression too, unfortunately. A 2021 study found that people scoring 125 and above on the CAT-Q, which is a little masking test that you can do. I've done it before in a video. I'll leave that linked if you want to do it along with me. It's a questionnaire developed to measure autistic masking basically. And yeah, individuals scoring 125 and above showed the greatest increase in relative risk for generalized anxiety and depression as well. And I'll leave a trigger warning here in case you want to skip to the next chapter, but there is unfortunately a connection there as well. Autistic people in general are already more likely to experience experience suicidal ideation and they are more likely to take their own lives. One study found that 3.9% of the autistic participants had a attempt at ending their own lives compared to 0.7% of the non-autistic participants. So quite a big difference there. These kind of stats are one of the reasons why I find it so upsetting when people try and gatekeep autism or try and undermine how autistic somebody is. I just find that one of the most stupid, unproductive discussions, just because on a surface level somebody seems to have good communication skills and be able to make eye contact. That doesn't mean that everything is magical for them. Yes, not all autistic people require full-time care. Autistic people can have different levels of support needs, but that doesn't mean we don't face other risks as a result of our brains being wired differently. So yes, compensation, which is kind of another word that's used for masking sometimes in the research, has been found to be a risk marker for autistic people taking their own lives, alongside unmet support needs as well. So yes, all autistic people really do deserve a diagnosis, and it would be really wonderful if there was more post-diagnosis support. I personally started to have thoughts about wanting to, not be here anymore, probably when I was about 7 years old, which seems like crazily, ridiculously young, but I think that's not an uncommon experience for us. I think a lot of autistic children do deal with mental health difficulties. I mean, most autistic children are being forced to go into school every day, into a very uncomfortable environment. Speaking of my school experience, burnout is also another mental health issue that autistic people can face as a result of masking. Autistic burnout is kind of something that can happen if we continuously ignore our own needs and our own boundaries. If you're in like a stress response for a very long period of time, and it can look a lot like depression, you can struggle to do anything basically. The National Autistic Society lists masking as a life stressor, which can lead to burnout. I experienced autistic burnout in my late teens. I have a whole video about it, but it was very connected to the very intense masking I was doing at that period of time. I was like trying to be an extrovert every day. And it basically felt like my nervous system had been put through a paper shredder. I kind of just lost my ability to function. I had to drop out of sixth form college, despite the fact that I'd been predicted good grades. And it took me 3 years to feel fully recovered from it as well. So once again, just because somebody seems fine on the surface, as I probably did to my teachers who just thought, oh yay, she's doing really well, it doesn't mean that somebody isn't reaching a crisis point. Dr. Hannah Louise Belcher has this flowchart that kind of shows the cycle of masking and how it can lead to burnout, which I really like. Her experience is quite similar to mine. She had to drop out of going to conventional school when she was 14. So it starts with, I want people to like me and I want to fit in. I have to do what they expect of me by masking. I can't look after myself and meet my own needs too. I burn out and go into crisis, and then I withdraw from others. And then the cycle starts again because you come back to, I want people to like me and I want to fit in, because once you've kind of isolated yourself, you're not really fitting in anymore. You've kind of shown yourself to be a bit strange at that point. So then you have to restart the cycle again. Like when I left college, I absolutely lost friends, and I had one friend who had kind of a little bit more of an insight into how I'd been feeling, and she was just like noping out of there. She was like, I don't know what's going on with her, but I don't want to have anything to do with it. So that was kind of the end of that. I think monotropism, which I talk about all the time, it's a theory of autism. I'll leave my video about it linked, but it's kind of this idea that autistic people like to focus their attention resources. We all have limited attention resources, but autistic minds really like to focus those attention resources on few things, but at a high intensity. That is kind of our natural state to be in. And so we're monotropic. Non-autistic people are more polytropic, and they distribute their attention more evenly. And when you're masking, you're performing something that has been called the monotropic split. Splitting this monotropic attention in a way that's unnatural and uncomfortable and distressing for you, like when I described how socializing can be all these different things that you've got to focus on. Many people say that masking is one of the hardest parts about being autistic, and I think that's why. It's just extremely unnatural and unintuitive. Number 2, the second danger, unfortunately, masking can also be a safety risk for autistic people. In my video on the 4 different types of masking, I focused on fawning and people pleasing. Fawning is a threat response. You try and be nice and agreeable to whatever is threatening you to kind of make the threat go away. A lot of autistic people do it, and you can maybe see how this people pleasing would make you vulnerable to people who have ulterior motives. Particularly as autistic people can be more literal. It can make us kind of naive. We can assume people mean what they say. It can be really difficult for me personally to comprehend that somebody could be lying to me, and I find that idea very distressing. So autistic people are more likely to experience something called mate crime. I certainly know of autistic people who've experienced it. I've had instances in my family where people have trusted the wrong people with their money and ended up in bad situations. Hate crime is kind of used instead of hate crime to describe instances where people will target people who are vulnerable due to their disabilities. They often target people with learning disabilities or intellectual disabilities, and also autistic people, and then kind of befriend them and then steal from them or manipulate them into doing things for them. You can kind of see how somebody who masks a lot, somebody who is desperate to be accepted and to be approved of by the people around them, and who has learned to make people like them by smiling and being agreeable, how somebody could end up in this sort of situation. And the difficult thing with autistic people, particularly with autistic people who don't look autistic, who seem to be quite socially competent because they're good at masking, that can kind of hide the fact that they do have a disability that affects their ability to socialize. So the people around them might assume they don't need any support in that area and not, be looking out for them. This is a quote from one study that I read recently. One participant identified being taken advantage of by a friend, in quotation marks. I was really close friends with a girl, but my dad pointed out that I kept doing things for her, but I didn't see it. Like, we'd go for lunch and I'd pay and she wouldn't pay. And I see people on autism Facebook groups and stuff all the time clearly being taken advantage of and kind of asking, like, am I in the wrong here? And it's like a terrible situation. Like, their neighbors are constantly dropping their kids around for free childcare and they're like, is this normal? Is this okay? Am I overreacting by thinking this is weird? And the autistic person feeling like maybe they're somehow in the wrong for feeling like uncomfortable with the situation and doubting their own discomfort. If you are worried about mate crime, I'll leave a link down below to a page on Ambitious About Autism, which contains some advice. Autistic people are also sadly more likely to find themselves in abusive relationships or to be abused by loved ones. I think unfortunately it makes a lot of sense for a population of people who have kind of been taught, been trained by society to ignore their own needs and to ignore signals from their own body, particularly if they've been masking a lot and internalizing a lot. For example, if you dealt with sensory issues as you were growing up, particularly if you were undiagnosed, which a lot of people who mask a lot did go undiagnosed until later in life. If you complained about a sensory issue, you might have been told you were overreacting, that you were too sensitive, that your experience was just wrong, and then that isn't how it is for everyone else, it's just you. I think over time we can just give up listening to ourselves and listening to our own bodies and listening to our intuition and just feel like, oh, I'm wrong. That's obviously just a me thing because nobody else seems to be complaining. This sort of theme of like doubting yourself unfortunately came up quite a lot in this 2023 study that I read on abuse and victimization in autistic people. I thought I was misinterpreting myself. They're saying this is enjoyable and this is fun, but I'm not liking it. In general, any kind of social situation, I always get things wrong. And then there's also, I grew up being told I was wrong, too sensitive, too serious, not ladylike, etc. For a long time, I wasn't even sure who I was. You might think, oh yeah, well I suppose I am usually the one that's in the wrong and others are usually right, so therefore my abuser must be right, even when that's not true. Because many autistic people don't fully understand societal norms, if an abusive person senses that, they may be able to gaslight you and tell you certain things are like perfectly fine and normal, everybody does this. Masking could also lead to risky situations because autistic people might kind of accidentally send out the wrong signals to people. For example, maybe you smile a lot these days because you were told in the past when you were growing up that your facial expression was too flat and you looked bored all the time, or it looked kind of hostile, so you go over the top with your facial expressions now. You could end up overcompensating and smile too much at the wrong person, and then they could get the wrong idea. It could be interpreted as some sort of invitation. They might get some sexual ideas in their head or something like that. I've often mentioned how there was somebody in my college who just randomly started tickling me and I have no idea why. I didn't ask for that. But it can be really hard when you're used to just being polite to people as a way to gain social approval. My mask when I was a young child was just being the shy but smiley kind of sweet girl. And then when I went to do work experience when I was about 15, sometimes people in the UK in high school will do like a week of work experience. I kept having to go and ask them if they wanted tea or coffee, which was really awkward because you were in the middle of a meeting and they were all talking. And I was in the center of a busy city. I was followed several times and then I had like men stopping to talk to me. I was 15 and I looked younger than I was. Like, what are you doing? It was just so hard for me to just not be polite, even though I was very uncomfortable. But I was like, no, I have a boyfriend. I don't want to come and have a drink with you. I'm actually just, trying to find the post office on work experience. It's just so ingrained to be nice to people. It can be really hard to switch that off because there are times where you don't want to be nice to people and where being too nice can kind of get you in trouble. And this is obviously not an autistic person's fault. None of this, no abuse is ever your fault. And sometimes, you do just cross paths with the wrong person. Autistic women who are sometimes shown in some studies to mask more than autistic men. I've read 80%, and then I've also read 9 out of 10 have been subjected to some sort of, domestic or sexual abuse. And when you think about the fact that the main therapy for autistic people who are kind of diagnosed earlier in life, the gold standard is kind of still ABA therapy, which has a big emphasis on compliance, it's no wonder that autistic people might feel like they just can't say no, that they don't have the right to say no in certain scenarios. And obviously this is not as serious as any sort of abuse, but I often, particularly when I first started my videography business, I did end up in bad situations with clients because they'd got me on the phone, and because I'm so conscious of masking and coming across well on the phone, I'd agreed to things, agreed to prices that were just not suitable. At one point, I literally ended up filming 4 events, and I ended up with profits of £25 from filming 4 different long events. How does that happen? I just find that when I'm in this masking state, it feels very kind of a survival response that switches on. It's not entirely in my control. I can just try and say the nicest thing possible, or I can be in mode of I want people to like me. I'm going to say whatever is going to make them like me, and I don't really entirely think things through, and things just blah out of my mouth, and I just fill the silences. You're allowed to slow down, you're allowed to have pauses, and you're allowed to say I need some more time to think about that, no matter what it is, unless it's really a life or death decision that has to be made in that split second. But most things, you're allowed time to think about it and to maybe go away in a private space. Number 3, another danger of masking is losing your sense of self. Masking can literally feel like going out every day and playing a character and performing a script. And if people want to like you and be your friend, well then yay, that's great. I guess the masking's worked, but it's not really you. So are they really friends with you? If you start masking around someone, chances are, unless you get super close with them, you're going to feel like you need to mask around them all the time. The people who I was friends with at school, I didn't see that often outside of school. Sometimes I would, but I would find it kind of exhausting to see those people outside of school. And now I recognize, well, they were kind of connected to my masked self, my school self. So I felt like I had to continue that. And it didn't feel the same as when I saw the people who I knew solely outside of school, who didn't know the masked me, who I spent time with one-on-one, who got to know the real me a little bit more. So I had a close friend that I made at ballet. My mom helped me make friends with her. And my cousins, my younger cousins, were who I spent most of my time with outside of school. It did feel like school self and home self were 2 very different people. And even when I went to my dad's house every second weekend, it was more like school self that went to my dad's house every second weekend. There's a study where mums of autistic girls were asked about their children's masking. She was like Jekyll and Hyde, because she would be lovely and excited, and the minute we got home it was just awful, and then she would scream, and then she would sleep, which I thought was great, but now I realize how exhausted she must be. I don't know about you, but my close family also used this kind of Jekyll and Hyde comparison for me for sure when I was younger. It really affected my self-esteem at the time, because I had no idea why it was happening. Why am I such a bad person when I'm at home compared to, how nice I am when I'm at school? I'm such a nice person at school. Having this kind of fragmented identity doesn't feel great, and I think this can be one of the major reasons for the depression that I spoke about in the first point. I think masking can make social interactions, even and maybe especially when they're going really well, feel really lonely, because nobody really knows you, and it feels like it's impossible for them to ever really know you, particularly once you've already kind of committed to masking around them. It's very difficult to then dismantle that. In the book Autism and Masking, one autistic person speaks about how masking led them to a mental health breakdown and being admitted to a mental health unit. They said, "I saw no way of living as the real me. I knew difference wasn't good, and I was so scared of not fitting in." With masking, there's kind of always this hovering risk of being ostracized if you don't mask, or if you kind of slip up. But then if you do mask, I've seen it described as kind of a self-ostracization. You're saying, I'm not good enough. Who I am is not good enough. My true self is not fit for human consumption. It's not a great feeling. I think I personally struggled even more with this identity stuff post-diagnosis, sadly, and maybe it's just something that I'm gonna kind of get through eventually. I don't know if anyone else can relate to this. It's just really difficult to have to come out to people in your life about being autistic and just kind of worry about not being believed. You're kind of working against your own mask. You're trying to undo this hard work that you've done for years to come across as not weird, not weird. And then you're like, no, look, I am actually weird. I promise I'm really weird. Look at all this weird stuff that I've done. Had tears in my eyes when I found this quote on Embrace Autism. While your constructed self may excel in the social domain, at the end of the day, there is no energy left to nurture the true self. What place is left for the true self other than to be hidden deep within you, not to be seen by most, or indeed forever shielded from every other person? The constructed you takes over and is living, while deep inside the genuine you is struggling and withering away. So number 4, masking, kind of wanting to fit in, could lead some people to alcohol and drug addiction. Now this obviously won't affect every autistic person, obviously none of these things will affect every autistic person, and not every autistic person masks as well, so that's always important to remember. So there's kind of some mixed data on this one. There are some data to suggest that autistic people who mask more might be less likely to drink, but anecdotally I know some autistic people do struggle with drugs and alcohol. I know that I personally sadly have had some of my favourite social interactions while I was drunk. I was 19 the first time I was drunk, which is like really old in the UK. It's legal from 18, but a lot of us tend to drink a lot earlier than that. I just remember I really enjoyed the way it kind of got rid of my mask to some extent. Like I lost some of that social anxiety, some of that overthinking, and I just kind of said things and was able to be a little bit more confident in the way I might have liked to be otherwise. And for a while I was like, oh, everybody does accept me. It's just me being too shy. Like when I actually speak, everyone is really lovely. But then later on I kind of realized, oh yeah, well everyone's lovely because they're drunk as well. So they're not noticing little differences and like oddities about you, you know? They're not going to notice if the mask slips. And if it does, they're just going to think, oh, well, she's drunk and I'm drunk and everyone's drunk and let's have a good time. So it was kind of a freeing experience. Obviously, there are things that I don't like about drinking from an autistic perspective. Like it can make you feel very weird in your own body, and then also lack of control. And you can end up cringing massively about what the hell did I do when I was so drunk and unmasked last night. And it can be very, very painful. So the older I get, I feel like the worse that kind of next day anxiety gets. There was a survey of 507 autistic people, and one of the reasons for drinking that autistic people gave was alcohol makes verbal communication easier, and the people who drank heavily said they drank heavily for social reasons. And I watched a talk recently from an autistic guy who struggled with alcoholism as well, and he drank to kind of get through the workday. He kind of wondered, why doesn't everybody drink? Why isn't everybody drinking to get through? Because he thought everybody dealt with as much anxiety as he did, and then he was only diagnosed as autistic in his 40s. So is masking all bad? I saw this post recently on Facebook from Sally Cat PDA. I am my mask and that's okay. There's a lot of talk about dropping masks, but this isn't something that works for me. Dropping my mask takes huge effort and it feels horrific. I don't think all types of masking are the same. And I was like, yeah, particularly for somebody who identifies with the PDA profile, pathological demand avoidance. I have a video all about that if you don't know what that is. It kind of made sense though, somebody who fits that profile, like the way that we talk about unmasking sometimes in the autistic community, like somebody just needs to rip the mask off and just step into the light, step into their autistic self. That might feel pretty demanding to somebody who's a PDA and to many autistic people, and very high pressured. If you spent years building up this mask, you can't expect yourself to be able to just tear it down overnight. That feels unrealistic to me. And a lot of it is a really deeply ingrained survival response. A lot of it feels like it's out of my control. There's been many times where I've been like, I wish I could mask less, and I just can't do it, you know? And it's not that simple and black and white that masking is bad and unmasking is good, particularly in this world that we live in. An ability to mask can be seen as a privilege. It can help you to land jobs. It can help you to get into relationships. It's not necessarily going to benefit you positively to drop it completely, but what I do think is that masking should be done in moderation. As with point 4, alcohol, moderation. The National Autistic Society has this page about reducing burnout, which I really, really like, and I've mentioned it numerous times on the channel. And it kind of talks about just letting yourself be autistic, spending time on your own, or spending time around people who let you be autistic, let yourself stim. Anything you can do, I think, to move yourself towards a life that's going to allow for more recovery time is probably going to benefit you mentally if it is possible to do that. Engage in your interests, spend time with people who are never going to call you names, who are never going to call you weird, no matter what you do. Let yourself be autistic. And if you're not sure what being autistic means, then you might enjoy this video about the theory of monotropism, my favorite theory of what autism is. I think it's a great way to understand autism for yourself and to maybe explain it to family members. If you enjoyed this video and you want to see more like it, but maybe you've seen everything on the channel already, for $4 you can join my Patreon, and I do 2 exclusive videos a month over there. The last one was a 53-minute Q&A with my husband. And I also before that reacted to like the weirdest stock that I found while making these videos. And there's also a Discord server that you can join even on the lowest tier. You can get in the Discord server and you can chat with other neurodivergent people and people who think they could possibly be autistic. You don't have to be autistic, you can be anything. Just gotta be nice, just gotta be kind. Before I go, I just want to say thank you so much for your support. It's been quite a stressful week and it feels really nice to kind of have this community behind me. Thank you very much. I'm very, very grateful for you, and hopefully this video was at least a little bit useful.